Just for a moment, close your eyes and listen. What do you feel? For the longest time, I felt extraordinarily weird when expressing the overwhelming inundation of emotion flooding in upon hearing the orchestral masterpiece that is the Elven Forest OST. Not only did I feel like an outcast because I tied so many of my experiences growing up to video games, but I also felt I was not living life right. That might sound strange at first, but it came from an almost compulsive desire to be normal and appreciated as a growing up teenager. Of course, retrospectively I can classify it as an attempt to assimilate to the societal norms that I perceived as the correct way to live. However, at that moment I was unaware of the process I was the main protagonist in. The reason I'm telling you all of that is because I believe that many of you who are listening to this video right now felt at least similar. Growing up with MMORPGs quickly leads to the realization that this genre differentiates significantly from other sorts of video games. And I'm not talking about differences in the overall structure and gameplay design, but the meaning we accredit to them. Now, naturally, we can argue about if video games have meaning to begin with, which would inevitably lead to a discussion about meaning itself. But let's not go down that road. When I talk about meaning in this context, I'm not referring to any societal perception of what has meaning, but instead I'm defining meaning as a highly personal perception referring to the individual impact this sort of media had on you. This meaning will be more vigorous the earlier you were exposed to the stimulus. Growing up, we are exposed to countless impressions that, on an impressionable young mind, can and will have a lasting effect. It's easy to see how experiences you've had in your early life lead to a lasting effect in your adult life, be it simple behavioral patterns or, at worst, severe trauma. A person growing up goes through multiple of these phases that educational science calls critical periods. This impressionable young mind being in the midst of a critical period is especially receptive to the experiences an MMORPG can offer. This goes well beyond the simple joy of playing a video game.
1-on-2 from Odyssey now.
It's sacrificial. Gives his position away. He wants Odyssey's end gone. But this man, oh, the shepherd's staff takes down the goat.
But inherently indicates a meta level that, for individuals who are willing, opens the discourse of the meaning of growing up, assimilating to life and society, and accepting the disillusionment of the world to rationality. The loss of sense of wonder, curiosity, and unprejudiced approach to new experiences is one of the most tragic developments any juvenile has to go through. Joining an MMORPG in that time window is the antithesis to this, however. When I first joined World of Warcraft in 2009, I had no idea what this world was about. I didn't know the rules, didn't know the limits of it. I had regained a sense of wonder and curiosity I had to give up in my real life because I was thrown into a world that held possibilities I felt weren't possible in the real world anymore. Naturally, this world sucked me in for a long time. Gaming sessions of 8 hours or more were not a rarity, and I remember vividly logging into World of Warcraft for an hour before school just to stand around in Stormwind to be a part of this world just a little bit longer. It doesn't take a genius to see that such a strong stimulus creates a pathway to addictive behavior. And I am in no means denying that. I certainly engaged in addictive behavior. The issue I'm having stems from the media craze about MMORPGs and their demonization that demanded a ban on these games without ever coming to the eureka moment of realizing that they perhaps should engage with their kids more and try to figure out what they are going through. It was a simple fight against a symptom that failed to identify the underlying cause of the massive allure to spend your free time in a fictional world instead of the real one. Now, you probably remember me saying that MMORPGs differentiate significantly from other genres of video games, exceeding the mere difference in structure and gameplay itself. And you might wonder, hey, single-player games can do that as well. However, single-player games have one very important difference. They have an end. MMORPGs do not.
Tomorrow, there will be no shortage of volunteers, no shortage of patriots. I know you understand.
The reason that's important is that single-player games will, for the most part, always offer the same experience. You know what to expect, which in turn leads to a loss of wonder again. Will you lose this sense of wonder in MMORPGs as well? Yes, surely at some point you will. However, a constant expansion of the game will lead to new and more experiences that perhaps can't entirely replace the sense of wonder you felt at the beginning of playing, but certainly exceed the possibilities that a single-player game offers you. The non-existence of an end also leads to a complication of finding mental closure, which in turn leads to a continuation of engaging with the world. This delivers the necessary prerequisite for MMORPGs to be a long-term companion instead of a brief acquaintance. In a way, you form a relationship with that game without actually being aware of the impact it has on you. The game becomes a friend that satisfies your desire for escapism, and it will do so whenever you want it to. Except for maintenance day. Not only growing up with MMORPGs, but rather alongside it, is an aspect that refers to the vast universes MMORPGs contain within them. Needless to say, this isn't only true for MMORPGs, as Tamriel and Azeroth, for instance, have been established universes well before the release of their respective MMO. And although MMORPGs can't claim exclusivity for these universes, the deep lore and storylines contained within them point us to another aspect of MMORPG's profound ability to bind the player. Within the Warcraft universe, Arthas Menethil has been the son of Tyrannus Menethil II, rendering him the rightful heir to the throne of Lordaeron. What seems to be a simple affair of royalty turns into one of the most tragic character developments in all of gaming ever. If you have not heard of Arthas before or aren't familiar with his story, I will try to summarize it as concisely as possible, so please, Warcraft lore nerds, don't crucify me. If you're not interested in a bit of lore dive, skip to here. Also, spoilers. Arthas was brought up as a paladin of the light, with Uther Lightbringer teaching him as a mentor. Arthas was described as a brave, albeit impulsive man that preferred to lead his people by example instead of remaining at the command stand. However, he was also characterized as arrogant and quick to anger, that led to Uther's attempt to humble him multiple times. When a plague spread within their kingdom when Arthas was 24 years old, he was sent to investigate this strange illness. To Arthas and his companions' horror, the plague wasn't just a deliberate attempt to mass murder civilians, but was used to turn regular humans into undead. Arthas' attempt to warn the citizens of Stratholme from the plague-infested grain failed, as the grain had already been distributed. Arthas knew that the citizens of Stratholme would soon turn into undead, and made a momentous decision. He ruled to purge the city of Stratholme of its inhabitants, despite Uther's disbelieving protests. Arthas and his loyal men slaughtered every citizen of Stratholme and burned the city to the ground. To this day, the fires are raging, and you can even witness this in-game. Arthas came across Mal'Ganis, the mastermind behind this operation, a dreadlord and commander of the undead Scourge. However, Arthas was unable to defeat him as he slipped away, taunting him to follow him to Northrend. Arriving in Northrend, Arthas was filled with an insatiable thirst for revenge for the demise of his people. This recklessness led him into the arms of an infamous runeblade, Frostmourne, that he thought would help him defeat Mal'Ganis. His hopes came true. After wielding Frostmourne, Arthas was able to defeat Mal'Ganis and his army, but it came for a price. Arthas had ignored the etched warnings upon finding Frostmourne that the blade was cursed and was now tasked to pay the price. The blade started to corrupt him and tear on his soul, tantalizing him to the prospect of unimaginable power. Arthas began to change. His hatred and longing for revenge opened his heart to the corruption and the voice of the Lich King, the king of the undead scourge. He became the first Death Knight. His appearance changed. His hair turned white, his skin turned pale and tinted in blue, and his previously green eyes turned into an icy blue. He then returned to his home in Lordaeron, where he murdered his father and King of Lordaeron. When you return to the old throne room in World of Warcraft and turn up the ambience, you can still hear this encounter. To save some time here, I will have to skip over some events that go more into depth. For now, we skip forward to when Arthas became the Lich King himself. After claiming the Helm of Domination, Arthas merged with the old Lich King Ner'zhul and became the new commander of the Undead Scourge, reigning with total power. At this point, Arthas had lost his last shreds of humanity and was no longer Arthas. His empathy was completely gone, and he failed to have an emotional response to his previous companions such as Uther and Jaina Proudmoore. Arthas was gone. Long live the king. In the Wrath of the Lich King expansion for World of Warcraft, we, the players, finally ascend the Icecrown Citadel, and after a prolonged struggle with the Undead Scourge, finally reach the top to meet the previous Paladin of the Light at his frozen throne. With the help of Tyrion Fordring, the players manage to defeat the Lich King and are met with this scene containing one of the most beautiful orchestral pieces ever written.
Father, is it over? At long last. No king rules forever, my son.
I see. Only darkness before me.
With Warcraft 3 being released in 2002 and the Fall of the Lich King patch in 2009, this scene ends the story that has been built up for 7 years. Within the Warcraft community, it is considered the best story in all of Warcraft, with one of the best payoffs in gaming in general ever. Children, teenagers and young adults playing both games in that time window didn't just see themselves grow up, but instead witnessed the progression of the lore of a universe they have spent so much time with. The emotional connection to the game isn't simply because of the seemingly unending possibilities or the allure of escapism anymore, but transcended into a palpable connection with the game world itself. Instead of a single example of an emotional connection to the game, it has become multi-layered, combining different aspects, turning the game from simply being a game into a holistic experience. Another facet we haven't explored yet is the sense of achievement and the progression of your game account that, in truth, used to be the general idea of this video to begin with. In single-player games, character progression is usually a means to an end. You become stronger in order to defeat stronger foes and beat the game. While this is also true for MMORPGs, they also offer a persistence provided by the aforementioned non-end and the integration of collectibles that will transcend the acute power level of your character. In simple terms, that means your achievements will hold value long after you have earned the associated reward. Along with the memories you have connected with the game, achievements and collectibles transcend the mere premise of single-player games to simply beat the game. In a sense, you put work into the game to build up your account and tie new memories to it when achieving the goals you have set for yourself. Comparing this to single-player games, we can detect similarities in the sense that these games also have collectibles and achievements tied to them. However, the existence of an end renders them redundant once you have completed the game. The persistence of MMORPGs leads to the fact that it doesn't come to a devaluation of the aforementioned work you have put in, and instead adds to the build-up of your game account. Your game account turns into a conglomerate of experiences naturally tied to a plethora of emotions, leading to an intensification of meaning you accredit to it. The accumulation of collectibles and achievements, however, ties heavily to another aspect that shares similarities with the discussed disillusionment of the real world and forced exposure to a realist contemplation of the real world around you. This hilariously pretentious juggling with words merely serves as a segue to the dissonance of the realization of limits the real world holds and the seemingly unlimited possibilities of the universe of an MMORPG. When we are talking about achievements, I don't just refer to them as a gameplay mechanic that pops up a shiny overlay in your face, but instead the limitless possibilities of this fictional world serve as an antithesis to the disillusionment of possibilities and achievements of the real world. While the real world holds limits, this game seemingly does not. This leads to the player being exposed to activities that are easy to do because you are not bound to basic human needs like eating, sleeping and so forth. While you certainly won't fight a dragon in the real world anytime soon, the activities you engage with in-game can lead to a sense of accomplishment that the real world does seem to lack for you, or at the very least are very hard to achieve. This can lead to a shift in what the individual ties their self-worth with. I know this because this is what happened to me. Of course, in the real world this isn't as cut and dry. I can, however, not deny that at some point in my life I felt my time in World of Warcraft had meaning, whereas the real world did not, as I felt I didn't belong there. Obviously, there are a multitude of factors on top of the simple allure of MMORPGs that added to this sensation. Growing up with divorced parents and being caught up in no man's land, the emotional unavailability of my parents, and the awareness at 5 years old of what abortions are and that, in fact, I was supposed to be aborted as well does, to put it bluntly, severely fuck up a young child's mind. This internalization of not being wanted and not belonging does, unfortunately, still seep into my adult life today. And while this is neither the time nor the place to go into depth about this, it surely serves as a great example of why I was drawn into the world of MMORPGs so much. I believe the craving to find a place to belong to is a core experience for every young teenager growing up. And the goal of this doesn't magically materialize into existence at a set age. I am 28 years old, and today I am still struggling regularly with myself and where I belong. To this day, expectations that I perceive society has of me weigh heavy on me, because I lack the guidance in my early life. MMORPGs don't merely function as a replacement for achievements, but also offer a wonderful way to escape from reality in general. One of my first memories I can recall are the attacks on the World Trade Centers on September 11, 2001. I remember my mom trying to switch the channels on the TV because she thought I was watching an action movie that was inappropriate for my age. only for her to realize this action movie was running on every channel. Now, more dramatic minds than me would perhaps describe this experience as the end of a child's innocence, being exposed to the horrors of the world. And while it's true that at 4 years old, I was still about 8 years off before entering the World of Warcraft, it serves as a prime example of what young adults, teenagers and kids nowadays are exposed to at a very early age. Risking to sound like a boomer here, but in my opinion, the exposure of young kids and teenagers to the harsh reality of the world is a process that is irreversible and starts too early, contributing to the disillusionment of the world and an early confrontation with real-world events. Once this Pandora's box has been opened, it can never be closed again, so keeping a child's mind protected from this just a little bit longer is a worthwhile endeavor. MMORPGs not only function as a means of escapism, but were also a companion in a time where I felt the real world didn't have any for me. As an adult, I can reflect on that and distance myself from it sufficiently to not get trapped into an addiction. However, I know that many people haven't been as fortunate. This isn't to say MMORPGs are bad, or that I'm jumping on the demonization train 15 years too late. What I'm trying to convey is that MMORPGs walk a fine line between being a companion and being a devil. I haven't played World of Warcraft since the release of Dragonflight. I don't plan on returning anytime soon, but even if I'd never set foot into Azeroth again, I have a hard time imagining deleting my account. Because it isn't simply a collection of mounts and achievements, but also a core of me growing up. I can tie emotions and my real-world situation for every expansion I've played to this day. Deleting it would feel like erasing part of my history. The resurgence of legacy servers that present the game in a state it was many years ago led to polarizing opinions within the community that fought over the general appeal of a game that's essentially a decade old. While the one group dismissed the Allure simply as a glance through rose-colored glasses, the other argued that the game of the present has strayed too far from what it once made great. My issue with this, which frankly can be applied to many societal discussions, is the premise that it has to be either or.
Bro, this is just nostalgia and therefore invalid, you stupid asshole.
Excuse me, I mean no offense, but are you fucking stupid?
It's like one group is trying to demean the position of the other as invalid and therefore be in the right. As you might have guessed, I believe both arguments hold value within this discussion. It has to be noted that no group truly advocates for nostalgia, as I perceive nostalgia is often discredited as invalid, leaving the impression your fondness of a game has to be rationalized. The argument that a game simply makes you feel good is perceived as a weak one, which highlights exactly the clash between the maxim of rationality on one hand and the self-realizing lean into a sensation that can hardly be quantified or qualified. Of course, dictating your allegiance to something by the amount of arguments you have for it is, at least in this context, utter bullshit. The superimposition of rationality over emotion in a context that, by default, is heavily tied to emotion to begin with, is questionable at best. With that said, the attempt to recreate a sensation you've had with a game many years ago is a hopeless endeavor. The identification of emotions you've had many years ago and the realization that they can't be recreated today is a bittersweet moment that just feeds to the meaning we accredit to the game. And while strictly speaking that game is fictional, as well as the world it takes place in, your experiences and emotions you have tied to it transcend fiction and become part of your reality. That's why the assessment that it's just a game comes from a place of ignorance, because any sort of media that has an impact on you always transcends into real life. Maybe Azeroth is not real, but the emotions you tie to it certainly are. And while clinging to these emotions is, especially in moments of hardship, very appealing, we must not get lost in a past that seemingly held no worries for us, because attempting to recreate it will inevitably fail and hinders us on making new experiences. It is bittersweet, but yes, you will not ever feel the same thing that you did when you first got lost into an MMORPG again. However, nobody can deny you from making new memories that you will cherish in many years from now. Whether I like it or not, MMORPGs had a massive impact on my life. MMORPGs had meaning. They hold a very special place in my heart that no other genre can remotely compare to. But part of growing up also means realizing you have to let go and brave yourself for new experiences in your life, whether that is in video games or real life, and perhaps new happiness as well. In this video I have been talking a lot about World of Warcraft and the Warcraft universe. Truth be told though, my first proper MMORPG has been Lord of the Rings Online. If you have never played that, I highly recommend checking it out. But that's enough of me. What about you? Which MMORPG had the most impact on you? Share your journey with me in the comments down below. I'm curious to read through them. You might have noticed that this video has been quite a lot different from my usual content. So if you did like it, please give it a thumbs up because it helps me out quite a lot. And maybe you are even interested in supporting the channel, then you can become a member of the channel. That would also be greatly appreciated because it helps me make these videos possible. With that out of the way, I leave you as always with I hope you have a great day. I hope you have an awesome day. You take care of yourself and I will see you next time.